rationale for previous arguments to keep the system in place, and then the argument now given this dynamics that exist. It was back in 6 years ago during the consideration of the FY19 budget. No, actually, it was the FY20 budget, my first budget, where I advocated for free fares for kids, and that got a lot of support. It got unanimous support from the body, and what that turned into was a 57% increase in youth ridership within the year thereafter. And then we had the pandemic, when buses were free for everybody, basically everywhere across the country. And as we were coming out of the pandemic, I strongly advocated to maintain the free fare system, because as we rethought or needed to rethink society, we provided housing assistance for people who need it. We provided food for people who need it, medical assistance. But all too often when we think of social services, I think we need to keep in mind where people literally are. And for so many of these people, it's at the bus stop. And the social services we provide are all these external through nonprofit partners, other subsidies and other programs. But I do view this as a social service program. I do view it as a great equalizer in where those who need that support receive it, because otherwise they are literally stuck. It is not education that is the greatest determinant of someone's economic success. It's whether they can get to school or a job that determines their economic success. That's where public transportation comes in. And so by whatever means necessary we've gotten to this point, I appreciate the very thoughtful deliberation to get it here. And then one other really important data point that I'll summarize from the packet. Fare recovery in 2015 was 20%, which means 1/5 of ride-on was paid for by fares. In 2019, that dropped to 16%, and we're now at 2%. 2%. It doesn't make any sense, as the executive and the department have come to the conclusion, to make these capital investments when the return isn't there. And I would even go one step further in arguing the need is there, the social program is there, and we just need to utilize this point. Before I open it up for comments, I just want to go back to the budget implication real quick. If we or the full council were to change the recommendation in the various scenarios, can you just highlight what we would need to do to the budget in that regard? What we would need to add back, or?
Yes, so this is this would require adding back in the $560,000 in collection costs, as well as the $11.03 million in
as well as that one, yeah,
in capital expenditures in FY26. So this is you can see this as the roughly $9.3 million in net cost to the mass transit fund. This is a special property tax that is, but at the end of the day, it's all general revenue.
Right. Important to isolate that, right? Because again, we're not operating in a vacuum, and that's how the executive came to the decision that you all did. Last point before I open it up, I am supportive of the free fare model, but we cannot sacrifice service and reliability. Moving forward, I need a pledge from the department that operation times won't decrease, that routes won't decrease, because it does no good to have free buses if the buses aren't operating. If we get into a downward spiral, and despite being free, people don't want to ride it because it's not reliable.
Make a couple of points to that. First, there's a fact I omitted that I should have shared at the beginning, and that's that the last scenario with the 225 fare also includes an 18 to 20% decline in ridership based on the additional financial impact on customers.
Say that again.
There's an 18 to 20% decline in ridership associated with that last scenario, which is the best performing over the 6 years from a fiscal perspective, because that fiscal impact is affecting the customers and fewer of them will be able to use the system.
Doubling the cost to
Yes,
ride. Yeah.
that's correct. So in terms of, and I'm not sure Mr. Kenny highlighted that if you were interested in scenarios 4 or 5, there is the enforcement cost that's in addition to what was already in the budget before this year's submittal. In terms of your question about the service quality, so the service quality, that is one of the recommendations why we have this Fare Free Ambassador recommendation in there, is from our review of other agencies with Fare Free. It was a best practice to have additional eyes on the service to make sure that we aren't creating an unsafe or unproductive environment, and to be able to communicate with customers how to respect the service that's now free, which they used to have a barrier to entry to. So that's one aspect. The other aspect in terms of maintaining the quality of service, there's really nothing about the fare collection itself that improves the quality of service. It's actually a detriment to the service quality because it takes time and energy and delays each time somebody struggles with fare payment. The real driver of that is the availability of resources elsewhere, which this proposal does not affect or diminish the fiscal capacity to operate the transit system. So it should not, this decision in the short term should have no bearing on the quality of service that we're able to operate. In fact, it should potentially increase that quality of service. In the longer term, faced with other fiscal pressures, if there's a diminishment in the overall budget and resource to serve Ride-On, obviously that directly translates into quantity of service and quality of service delivered. And that's one of the reasons I say that the door should be open for reconsidering fare if we're in a position where that becomes an obviously needed revenue source, and we have a better way to collect that fare.
Thank you for that explanation. Colleagues, you want to jump in?
I want to underscore everything the chair said. Agree, moving in this direction, and I know there have been, since we both sit on the Council of Governments, that some of our colleagues there in DC have been pushing for this as well. But there's been a lot of conversations because we are regional in our transportation and know that what we do here does impact other people as well. But I do think this is a good place for us to move. Director Conley, actually, you raised something that I actually hadn't thought about before, but the idea that for our roads and everything, we don't, ask for a service charge when people use our roads and streets and things. And I think going to a fare-free system actually is really a shift in paradigm in how we're thinking about funding our public transportation. And it makes me even more so thinking this is a good direction for us to move in, because lots of times people don't think about using the roads or other things and the cost that to maintain them, because they're not being charged when they're actually driving on them. And so the idea that we're making our other public transit, our buses free, I think is a good direction, and having some parity there a little bit as we're thinking about different modes of transportation. So anyway, thank you for raising that, and I'm fully supportive of.
Yep, good observation. And to our other colleague who's on the Transportation Planning Board.
Thank you. I appreciate you talking about the conversation that you had about the pros and cons and going back and forth and the advantages, disadvantages. I had that same conversation, but only to myself in my own brain. And so I did go back. I support the fare free, but it's to me, if, like, for instance, if we were looking at scenario 1 versus scenario 2, it's a no-brainer, right? Because of the cost of the fare collection. But the idea of enforcement, at what point did we stop enforcing?
I'll leave it to Mr. McLaughlin to respond to that, but I don't think we've ever had an aggressive enforcement program.
No, I mean, it goes back to 15, 16, 17, in that range. There was a spate of interactions between bus operators and customers that resulted in fights and altercations and ultimately lawsuits. So at that time, our organization went to an inform, don't enforce policy. And so to this day, we're still informing what the fare is. We're just not enforcing it at the bus operator. Over time, we've done some soft messaging, place the cost of the fare at the bus stop itself. It's on all our public messaging. So it's a little softer than true enforcement.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess just a couple of the other issues. I think the idea that, for instance, if we needed the revenues at some point in time, or there were unintended consequences that we didn't fully look at, going back to fare collection would be a very difficult thing to do, just from a behavioral perspective. If enforcement is difficult now, imagine if we had free fare for 3 years and then decided to change it. I think that I don't think that that's the probability of that happening, I think, would be low. So I think that this is certainly not a forever decision, but it is a very long-term decision that we're making, and just wanted to mention that. And then I think that something that you raised that I didn't consider was the potential for nuisance behavior or potentially criminal behavior. And I would guess that it would be, a bunch of kids decide to get on the bus and cause havoc because they don't have to pay $1 or something like that. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? I hadn't thought about that.
Some of the other issues that other agencies have experienced, and we have some of this currently, are all-day riding. Somebody who gets on the bus and stays on the bus without an intention to go somewhere. Mm-hmm. And your point about sort of hooliganism is a component of this, and we, again, experience some of this today. But other agencies have seen an uptick of that, or threatening behavior towards customers because there's just the perception that there's a lack of somebody minding the store, which is not really true. It's really the same staff that is there today. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, we have seen that in some cities. They've had an experience where, like on a light rail system, crime will be higher than on a bus system because the operator isn't visible to the customer, so they feel that there's no eyes on the situation, and their behavior is not as well restrained as it is when there's eyes on the system. So agencies who have implemented this, some have instituted a program like this to have more visibility at the stops, have more visibility on the vehicles, just to make sure that that sort of environment doesn't creep up, which is actually one of the major things that affects people's decision to ride transit: reliability, travel time, and a feeling of safety and security on the vehicle and getting to and from the vehicle. And those are the things, that's why we've added this component to ensure that we don't have a backsliding in that safety and security for the customers, coupled with this idea of fare free.
Okay, thank you. And then the all-day rider, is that a problem because of they're taking up space that other people would need, or is it because
that's a component, and it can be more than that. It can be issues of control of biologic function. It can be a variety of issues, and it is a health and human service concern. But one of the common ways that agencies manage this is requiring all passengers to disembark at the end of a route and not reboard as the bus immediately turns around. And that's a strategy that we would look for this program to embody as well.
Okay.
And additionally, that bus isn't always going back out as the same route it came in. It could be going back to the depot, could be going to a different part of the county. So it's, as Chris said, we can enforce that, not enforce, we can message that you get off the bus. And we have a operational protocol with our central communications team to dispatch a coordinator to help mitigate a situation should that occur. It doesn't happen a lot today. And as we mentioned, there's not a whole lot of folks paying on the bus today.
Okay, thank you. And then just because I represent District 2, the geographic equity of I support this, and I appreciate the hard work that went into this. We would just like more buses up my way. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Balcom. I would add, and we have the team here to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the 52 bus that serves Up County is one of the most popular. Is it the 52 or 48?
55. That's
55, I was
between
close.
Rockville and Germantown.
And that is one of the most highly used buses.
About 6,500 riders a day.
There we go. The need is there. So
Yes, it
there we go. Different conversation as well. Yes, duly noted. I appreciate your questions about the enforcement and the retroactive nature and psychology, something that you know very well as too. But I just want to accentuate that point. There are security cameras on every bus, correct?
There's security cameras on every bus, correct, and they're recording, not necessarily monitored.
Say that last part again.
They record the activity on the vehicle, but they're not necessarily monitored in real
Fair.
time.
Good. Good. Well, I think you've answered all of our questions, and we feel comfortable with that recommendation. So, without objection, we'll support the executive's recommendation for free fares in the next fiscal year and beyond.
Sounds good. Thank you. So, moving on to the second change on page 6 of the staff report. This is adding special permits for service providers and child care centers. This is a move to implement Bill 2924E, Transportation Parking Permit for Specialized Service Providers, that was adopted by, or it was enacted by the Council on March 4th. And signed into law on March 17th. This establishes a parking permit and monthly rate of $10 for specialized service providers and qualified child care centers within the Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton parking lot districts. So the executive is recommending line items in the resolution that would implement these provisions.
Turn it over to you.
Yeah.
Great.
Sounds good.
Without objection.
Thank you. The third change is eliminating the daily maximum and lost ticket fees from the Silver Spring PLD. Daily maximum and lost ticket fees are provisions meant for gated garages, and Silver Spring's final 2 gated garages have been converted to non-gated app-based payment systems, electronic payment systems. And so that these charges are obsolete. Under this new system, customers will pay for all the hours utilized in the Silver Spring parking lot district.
So this is like a technical amendment of sorts. Yeah. Okay. Great. Without objection.
Thank you. And finally, this is change 4 is eliminating garage-specific fees from the Silver Spring parking lot district. Currently, the Silver Spring garage monthly access, or the Silver Spring parking lot district monthly PCS permit costs $132 per month for every garage, except garages 60 and 61, in which they cost $195. The executive is recommending eliminating the garage-specific costs and instead implementing a $195 or less charge for the monthly permits across the entirety of the Silver Spring parking lot district. This would not have any immediate change to the monthly rate for any garages, and any future changes will need to go through the budget process, but will instead go through the parking district services budget. It'd be baked into the fiscal plan for those, rather than be called out as specific garage monthly access cards within the fees, charges, and fares resolution. So this is a technical change that grants DOT greater flexibility in future budget years, but does not change any fees currently.
Sounds great.
District Council Member.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds good.
So just picking up on that, eliminating the parking lot specific, parking garage specific. What was the original rationale for 60 and 61 being 195?
This is also related to the gated access control. Those were the 2 garages that had gated access control, so you had to issue an actual credential for use of those garages, and they're the 2 highest demand garages in the Silver Spring CBD, and there's no intention to lower that rate to be the same rate as the other garages. It just, as we made these other changes related to the change in access control, it made sense to change this provision as well.
And so through this budget process, at the end of it, parking in downtown Silver Spring would be $132 for that pass?
132, we would still have likely a special rate for those two garages, but it wouldn't be called out in the resolution. It would just be, we would use the current rate for that garage. And if over time, based on shift in demand, we wanted to change the relationship of the rates from garage to garage, we would be able to do that.
And no one should interpret this being an increase for the parking lots with parking garages for 132.
It is not an increase.
Just putting it all out there, right? So there's no confusion. Okay. Sounds good to me?
Yep, sounds good.
Great. Without objection.
Thank you. Those summarize all of the changes recommended by the executive in the FY26 transportation fees, fines, and fees, charges, and fares resolution. These are summarized in the table on page 7 of the staff report, but all have been addressed thus far, and those are the changes before the committee.
Great. Let's just do a quick vote, formal vote. All those in favor of the resolution on fees, fares, and charges? Or fees, charges, and fares. That one too. There we go. That's unanimous. Okay. Next item, complementary item, is on the FY26 operating budget for the Mass Transit Fund. And the county executive recommends an increase of $17.4 million, a 9% increase from the current fiscal year, which includes a recommended increase of a programmatic and staffing enhancements at a $1.5 million level. And Mr. Kenny, as we play musical chairs, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So there's the summary of all the points contained within the report on page 1. I'll dive right into the contents. On the top of page 2 of the staff report, you can see the top level figures that summarize what the changes that the executive is proposing. The executive is proposing a $17.5 million net increase in the total expenditures of the Mass Transit Fund. This is between the Mass Transit Fund and the Grant Fund, which in total encompass the transit services budget. This constitutes a 9% increase in the budget, and we'll get into what those components are going forward. The public testimony on most of these items was held on April 7th, 8th, and 9th. These include all of the operating budget items. This packet does contain several CIP amendments as well. Most of those, or some of those, were contained in those April 7th, 8th, and 9th public hearings. However, some of them others were transmitted after that date. That list is included in section B on page 2 of the packet. The public hearing for those items will be held on May 13th, as they were transmitted after our public hearing on the other items. For a quick run through of the department background, the Mass Transit Fund, which is supported by the Grant Fund for Transit Services, provides for the activities of MCDOT's Division of Transit Services, whose primary focus is operating the various ride-on services throughout the county. Although this budget also funds the Community Mobility Services Program, which operates the Transportation Management District's call and ride and other taxi cab regulations and subsidies. The remainder of MCDOT's operations are comprised of the General Fund and Parking District Service Funds, which will be covered this Thursday before the committee in this May 1st work session. as well as the various non-departmental accounts that fund budget. Of note, the committee held a work session on September 9th of last year on the Ride On Reimagined report. This is a top-to-bottom reimagining of the Ride On network. That study does not have any direct impact on this FY26 operating budget, as the more immediate changes will be done within Ride On's current operating, essentially within Ride On's current operating budget. Aside from some compensation and non-discretionary adjustments. Recommended service enhancements within Ride On Reimagined will be included in FY27 and or future budgets. That approach of exactly when those will be phased in has not yet been determined, although they are outlined in that study. At the top of page 3 of the report is a summary of the operating budget equity tool analysis for the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. This department-wide analysis conducted by the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice contained a modified strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis, not a numerical score, as was in previous years. This is an adjusted approach that ORESJ has taken across county government. And the strengths and weaknesses identified for MCDOT are highlighted in that section of the report. And the entire operating budget equity tool can be found in the circle pages attached to this staff report. Moving on to section E and table 2, which summarizes the county executive's recommended changes to the Mass Transit Fund. This is how we arrive at that 9% or $17.5 million net increase. As you can see, the majority of this change, roughly $17 million, can be accounted for via personnel adjustments, compensation adjustments, and non-discretionary adjustments, all of which the council has reviewed separately as you know, cross-department items, and much of that was discussed this morning. As a note, there is a 3% adjustment for nonprofit service providers that is included in those county government-wide items that is here listed within the non-discretionary adjustments. So per the council president's budget approach, council staff has sort of enumerated the additions and reductions, has pulled those out from the other items. So there are 3 additions and 2 reductions recommended by the executive to this fund. The 2 reductions are to the countywide transportation demand management outreach contract, and to the Transportation Services Improvement Fund taxicab reimbursements. The latter of those was reviewed, is the result of an executive regulation reviewed by this committee and by the council and approved by this council earlier this year, and just reflects collections of the TSIF fee from mobility or transportation service providers. The 3 additions, the proposed additions to the budget are highlighted at the bottom of page 4 of the report. I can go through these one by one, if that makes sense.
That'd be great. Thank you.
The first is the Howard County Flash expansion. This is a recommended addition of roughly $1.1 million for the expansion of the U.S. or an extension of the U.S. 29 bus rapid transit service, which currently operates between Silver Spring and Burtonsville, all within Montgomery County, across the border into Howard County. This is the result of an agreement, memorandum of understanding between Montgomery and Howard counties, in which Howard County is going to pay for the increased capital and operating costs of extending this service. There was a capital budget, or CIP, component of this that the council approved as a CIP or as a supplemental appropriation and CIP amendment earlier this year. This is the operating component of that. It is funded entirely by an intergovernmental transfer from Howard County. However, as of this morning, we learned that the Howard County Council did not approve the appropriation to fund this extension. So the decision before the council is whether to retain this expenditure or to remove it, as well as the assumed revenue. This is a budget net zero, net neutral decision either way. It's mostly one of procedure. I'll let DOT speak to this, but they have expressed that their preference would be to keep it. We would not be spending the money unless we get it, and essentially if we remove it now, that will require us to pass a supplemental appropriation should Howard County appropriate the money partway through FY26. So this is just trying to account for this revenue, and is a matter of, I suppose, procedural preference for the committee on what how we'd like to account for it.
We want to stop there? You want to go through? Okay.
Sure, we can stop there.
So, unfortunate breaking news today, right? Wish it were different, and I'm going to be calling some of my friends up in Howard County after this and ask them what they were thinking, because I know from our perspective, especially those of us who live along Route 29 corridor, we know that the traffic up and down Colesville Road, at least half of it emanates from Howard County. Yep. And so the traffic problems that exist in the eastern side of the county, we need Howard County as a partner, and this would have been a goal to work that through. So it's unfortunate. Mr. Kenny, you had said that the department would prefer to keep this line item in. Director Conklin?
I'd like to, if I could provide a little clarity on the Howard County situation, I'll
Sure.
call it. Both of us were waiting for earmark grants to be approved to move forward
Us
with
being
some.
Howard and
County
Montgomery.
and Howard County. Our grant is approved and signed and executed, so we have the funds now to purchase the vehicles. Their grant for some of the infrastructure is slightly behind, so it's not a question of their council rejecting this appropriation. This was not put before their council because Howard County has not yet received their funds and is not yet certain when they're going to be ready to operate the service. So it's not a dire outcome. It's just we're slightly out of step. So our recommendation is to retain this. These funds are not expended until that service starts, which is dependent upon Howard County initiating the service anyway.
Whatever facilitates the smoothest transition.
I think that would reduce the number of times we have to bring this before.
Right.
I guess one question I have is on timing and whether or not we retain the whole 1.1 million, or do we split some of it for FY26 and push some out to FY27, given some timing and just knowing how tight our budget is this year.
Again, there's no county funds associated with this.
Right.
It's all reimbursement from Howard County. But
right, so
that's certainly an option. It's highly, highly unlikely this will start in the first half of the year.
So it's more an accounting detail.
Right.
Yes, it's
than-
an accounting
okay.
detail.
The 1.1 million assumed that service would begin in the last quarter of fiscal year 26, and that DOT would get started hiring a little bit earlier than that, but it's not. It doesn't represent a full year of service.
right. So I'm just, I guess, just in terms of accounting and just like where we put the money, does it make sense to?
It would be appropriated to transit services budget. OMB and DOT would work to ensure that none of that is actually spent unless we're getting revenues to offset it in 26.
Okay, but that's not my question. I guess my question is, what's the most appropriate way for this money to show up? Because right now, I think what I'm hearing is all of the 1.1 is showing up in FY26. And what you're saying is there's no way, right?
I think what Mr. Nalvin said is that 1.1 corresponds to a quarter of the year already.
Yes, that's right.
Right. So just keep it.
And
that-
if we were to keep it, if Howard County were to find funding and wanted to begin service during FY26, we would already have the funding in our budget. If we didn't keep it in the budget, we would have to come back for a supplemental in FY26 to operate the service.
Right, I guess my question wasn't to remove the whole thing, but just in terms of timing, and maybe it's a difference without a, whether or not it made sense to account for half of it in FY26 and push the other out to FY26.
Okay, yes, the 1.1 million, that already represents only a quarter of FY26. So if you were
Only-
cut it in
got it.
half, that would be 1/8. So
Thank you,
month and a
that
half service.
makes sense, okay, I'm good.
I'm comfortable if it means one less email transmittal, one less resolution that needs to be written. Yeah, staff likes that
That's good, that's fine.
recommendation. Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my only concern was whether OMB had, whether having the expense and the revenue in the budget, whether it made any difference. It sounds like it doesn't make any difference at all, whether it's there or not.
It is some additional administrative overhead work for us because we need to track that money, make sure it's not spent on something else. That's something we're confident we can do. So it's not a big issue.
You can just pinky promise that it's not being spent.
A
Thank
difference without a distinction
Right,
is the
right,
phrase.
thank you.
that
That's what
we've
I
all
was
been- Right, yeah. Good, yeah. Okay, so we'll keep it as the department wants. Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
And I'll hold the calls to the council members in Howard County. So thank you for that too.
Moving on to the second change, this is the zero fare transit ambassadors. I won't go into too much detail as we discussed this a good deal in the previous item. This is a $250,000 addition, and we would expect this to be an annual cost within the Mass Transit Fund as we roll out the zero fare program. This is sort of done in tandem with that, as Director Conklin had mentioned, to ensure a smooth rollout.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. I know we kind of touched upon this, but I'd like to dig in deeper. So are these for FTEs to actually hire folks, or is this for messaging and outreach?
More the latter. We would see this as a contracted service, and there'd be some marketing funds here for promotional materials. Let folks know the service is free. Use the service, respect your area. You're in a public space, behave accordingly. Those type of things. That's not exactly the message, but
Right. No,
something like that.
you're not doing the marketing. That's why we're contracting. I got that. I just wanted to make sure that these weren't we weren't looking at FTEs. We're looking at more messaging and outreach and awareness.
I supplement what Mr. McLaughlin said. There might be some additional overtime for road coordinators and supervisors that are encapsulated in this as well, but not adding staff.
Okay. And then I know, Mr. Kennedy, you said in the packet this can't be tranched, and I'm not necessarily looking to tranche it, but I don't understand why it can't be tranched.
It can be tranched.
Okay.
The council staff did not establish discrete tranches, as there are not discrete portions of the program yet, as it is a sort of nebulous. It is an idea rather than a program with specific line items so far. So I suppose that's an error on my part that it can be tranched.
Cool. And do we, just to follow up on that, the 250, what's the basis for that number?
Similar to the rationale that we use for our enforcement, a certain percentage of our service. So 250 is we were 1% to 2% with the $1 million. This is a half to 1% of our service that we would come in touch with our customers. So we would see customers once every 100 buses, something like that. Just a small sample size to get that message out there.
Okay.
Councilmember Backlund?
Yeah, so I was with you until you just made that comment. So tell me, so if this is a marketing campaign, wouldn't we just hit 100% of the buses, or the message gets out to 100% of our riders? I don't understand that we would only be hitting a certain percentage of our riders.
No, we would certainly hit 100% of our riders unequivocally, and our non-riders as well, so non-riders in the system today. We also envisioned this as individuals on the bus who would go out there and hand out promotional materials, reminding folks that, the service is free, and again, I don't have the right words, but behave accordingly.
Sure, yeah.
So we envisioned that there be a certain percentage of the staff doing that, contracted staff on the buses itself.
Okay. And have you looked at what this program is going to look like, or you're waiting for the funding to come up with a plan and a RFP? And
yeah, we have some concepts how it can work. We have some contractual resources we can use. So we've noodled through this. We won't work out the details though until we get through this process.
okay, thanks. Yeah, the budget situation that we're in, and as much clarity as to what this is going to be, I think is good, and also from the perspective of ongoing expense. In the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of money when we look at the total budget for transit. However, we need to really look at whether the outcomes that we want in a free fare, we're getting that behavior and we're getting that increase in ridership. And I think that we need to built into the RFP, I think needs to be a really strong metrics of what we want to get out of it, and an evaluation, a rigorous evaluation of how effective these funds are in getting the outcomes that we want.
Just a couple of points. I think we can definitely build in that kind of assessment about the value delivered from this new effort. We don't anticipate a RFP specifically for this. We have contract resources that are already under contract that we can assign tasks for this. So I think that's going to be more of we'll establish a measurement program internally than it being part of the procurement action, which I don't anticipate there being.
So thank you. In that vein, I want to make sure that that there are that's a very clear understanding of what you want, and that we're not burning $50,000 just sitting around a table coming up with spitballing kind of thing. So I just want to have a very clear understanding of this. So thank you.
Color me a little more skeptical. I appreciate the explanation as to what this line item would do. I think the best marketing tool and publicity tool for fare-free ride-on is adopting fare-free ride-on. Everybody will know about it. And if that's essentially what the goal is for user engagement, to get people on the system and to know mission will be accomplished before it even starts. And I want to pair this conversation with one the committee just had last week with our climate officer. Recognizing that we have a lot of outreach and work to do in order to meet our climate goals, there was another $250,000 in a new program that was being proposed, and we asked what that was for, and it was basically outreach and publicity and information sharing. And among the different programs and topics to explore within that $250,000, one was mode share, getting people out of cars and onto transit. And so there's multiple things at play here that in the same budget, different offices have line items for similar goals. But in that instance, I did not support, and the committee didn't support that $250,000 line item because, again, if the goal of the climate officer was to support public transit, fare-free ride-on is the goal in it of itself, I believe. And so I'm not supportive of this if that's what the goal is, and it is a basically PR marketing tool to inform people. As long as, if that's what the stated intention is, I will not be supporting this because of the tough budget situation that we're in.
I just want to revisit the conversation we had when we were talking about the fare resolution. The intention of this is as much about behavior management, safety, and security messaging as it is about promoting fare-free ride-on as a benefit to the community. So it's a slightly different message than purely promoting that we're fare-free. And the idea is that it's not simply marketing, but it's marketing coupled with physical presence at key locations and key times to make sure that message is directly delivered to transit customers who in locations where we may be having issues with good behavior, safety, and security. So it is not purely marketing, it's marketing with an intention for managing potentially disruptive behavior in the transit system.
So then I'll refer back to the question that Councilmember Stewart asked about FTEs. Was that within this?
I think, yes, and I think you mentioned it was overtime, not adding FTEs. Is that correct?
We did
That was
not
the-
anticipate adding personnel to the complement to accomplish this, but we have road coordinators and field supervisors who may be working a little bit more to accomplish this message, along with contract staff, as Mr. McLaughlin mentioned, in more regular planned activities.
I see, Ms. Peckett.
Yeah, Haley Peckett, Deputy Director for Policy. I just want to add that we did a lot of extensive research, both looking at the cooperative transit research as well as contacting about a half dozen cities and having in-depth interviews who had gone fare-free. And one of their best practices was having a specific plan to address safety and security and having ambassadors, having a physical presence and having a face, especially at the rollout, to make customers feel like even though this change is happening for ride-on, it's not a huge change and that most people aren't paying currently, but that it gives a sense that like, hey, this is a new time. It's a good time to remember this is a public good. This is a public service, and please behave accordingly. So it's also a real best practice and something our peers have recommended.
I'm still skeptical that if you have a person greeting people, as I interpret it, on 1 out of every 100 buses, I'm having a hard time getting there.
So if I could, I understand, right? You didn't know where the council was going to go on free ride-on. So understand why this plan isn't completely baked yet and moved out. I think you've heard from the committee a unanimous recommendation to the full council. I would like to request that we put this on the reconciliation list and ask when you all come back to, if there's enough time, to the full council, just to kind of tease out a little bit more what this would look like, and if you can give us even rough estimates, how much of this is going to the overtime, to the actual physical people, how much of this is writing on contracts that we already have to get messaging out. And now that if you can spend a little time thinking about that before a full council, is the 250 fully needed in this FY26, or are there any adjustments there?
We can certainly do that, and as Ms. Peckett mentioned, we have examples from other agencies on how this program has been structured, so we could get that to you in advance of a full council meeting. Not before Thursday, I don't think, but
Yeah, no.
Before full
I think before full council is fine. Yeah.
That's right. I appreciate that suggestion. I'll go along with it. But again, I'm not interested in funding a PR messaging campaign. If it is other types of best practice I'll let you decide what those best practices are. But the best PR is free ride-on. We don't need to spend a penny more to let people know about what we're going to be doing. So, okay, Okay, great. So we'll accept that recommendation and put this on the reconciliation list.
Thank you. The final addition before the committee is an automated bus lane enforcement pilot. This is a contract that MCDOT has explored with WMATA to install cameras on buses that operate on Metro bus vehicles that operate along bus-only lanes in Montgomery County. This $160,000 is just the operating costs for administering the program, for processing the footage and delivering it to law enforcement and et cetera. This is WMATA is under this contract would put forward the capital costs for this program, which are more substantial of actually installing the cameras on buses that operate along the bus lanes in the county. So this would be a $160,000 addition.
If I could just clarify, the recommended budget also includes the exact amount of offsetting revenue assumed for this program. So this is assumed to be a budget neutral pilot for bus lane enforcement.
Do you know what lanes, what routes they would first appear on?
Georgia Avenue is where we would envision this to occur, yes. It's our only permanent lanes that WMATA has buses operating right now.
And the same one people keep emailing us about, saying there are cars driving there, and yeah.
And University would be second once we reach permanence of those lanes.
I just had a question first. Yeah, we need it on Georgia Avenue. Purple Line just shifted the lanes this morning, and it kind of threw me as I was driving to work. But I guess I just had a question on this, is whether or not we also need I know this is a pilot, but do we need a policy change on this in terms of enforcement and how we're using? I know there were WMATA buses, but I believe the police department had come before us about 8 months ago, and I can't remember if this was a T&E and public safety meeting or if it was GO in public safety. I cannot recall, but I remember they talked to us about what they were exploring, and we had to get enabling legislation from Annapolis in order to do enforcement in bus lanes. I believe that enabling legislation went through. So I believe in order to do something like this, don't we need legislation, or because it's a pilot we can do it, or we can just do it?
So I can speak to this. We've been working with OCA since even before the state legislation was passed. But once it was passed, they have determined, and I have this in writing, that we do not need local enabling legislation to do the enforcement. The enabling legislation allows us to use our existing automated traffic enforcement capabilities for bus monitoring.
Perfect. Thank you.
And bus lane enforcement was included in the police department's automated traffic enforcement plan, as you mentioned, which came before the joint public safety and T&E committee last year sometime. Don't remember exactly when, but yeah.
See, it's all coming together. Thank you, because part of the Safe Streets Act was the automated traffic enforcement plan, which needed state legislation to expand the scope of the program, which we've now gotten. Thank you, Delegate Von Stewart. And so if you're telling us that this is ready to go without anything more than just an expenditure, I'm in support of that.
Thank you. Can you just describe the revenue source? I didn't catch that.
That revenue would be from fees for violations. DOT had assumed, and this is an initial estimate, that the revenues from those fees would be enough to offset the cost of the pilot.
Okay, so we don't know if it's going to be 100,000 or 300,000. But we'll find out after this pilot. Okay.
So, not to devolve the conversation into the specifics, but would there be a grace period? How would we educate drivers on how to use a bus lane?
So we're working with Metro right now. We've been meeting with them. We're also meeting with the automated enforcement for police on a set of business rules. And so we are envisioning an initial warning period, and I think we have 45 days as our initial, but the business rules are still very much being redlined and figured out. So that's initially what we're working on, and then there's lots of rules that we can set in terms of how many violations one can get per day and per block and per lane violation and so forth.
And WMATA does this already in the district.
They do it in the district.
They're well versed.
We're bringing it to a local context here. Yes.
Very good. Okay. Without objection, we'll support that. And now we're on to the CIP amendments.
Yes. So there are 6 projects within the mass transit category that the committee is considering for CIP amendments. 2 of which were transmitted along with the operating budget in March. These are the ride-on bus fleet and ride-on fare equipment replacement projects. The remaining projects were transmitted on April 14th. So they're all contained here. I will introduce the first two in tandem, and as well as the bus rapid transit projects in tandem as they're kind of related, and then can discuss from there if that's all right. So the ride-on bus fleet and ride-on fare equipment replacement, these are the CIP savings that we are experiencing from making ride-on fare free. So this decision flows from the the committee's decision to approve of the executive's recommendation to make ride-on fare free. So we're seeing the savings you see for the ride-on bus fleet project are the marginal savings that we see from not having to include fare equipment in the procurement of new buses. And then the ride-on fare equipment replacement project can be zeroed out entirely as we no longer need to replace our current equipment given this decision.
Without objection?
Great. There are three amendments, or there are amendments to 3 bus rapid transit projects. These stem from changes made at the state level at the end of the legislative session. So there's a swap in funding between the Maryland 355 Central Bus Rapid Transit and the Maryland 355 South and North Bus Rapid Transit. The Central project had $167 million in state aid associated with the Opportunity Lanes Congestion Relief Project on I-495 and I-270. The status of that funding is pending. So since this bus rapid transit project is further along than its complementary South and North component on Maryland on Rockville Pike on Maryland 355, the funding from the Opportunity Lanes program was moved to the South North, which has a little bit more time before it's planned to move to construction, and this funding in the central component was replaced with $10 million in state aid currently programmed into the South North component and $141 million in new funding from the state Bus Rapid Transit Fund. This was also accompanied by a delay in construction expenditures and a total increase in expenditures for the Maryland 355 Central BRT project. This is due to some construction delays and the adding of the $22.4 million partially it does cover the extension of the southern terminus of this route from its previously planned terminus at Montgomery College in Rockville and extending it down to the Rockville Metro Station. So this route, if this amendment, if approved, would transform the Maryland 355 BRT to cover the whole length of the Rockville Metro Station up to the Germantown Transit Center.
Thank you for that, Mr. Kenny. I'll augment your comments, and when you mentioned the opportunity lanes, you said the funding was pending. I would say it's undetermined, quite frankly. And so just putting a little more uncertainty, right, with that, no additional comment. But I've said whenever we talk about 355 BRT, I still believe it needs to start at the northern end. That was a decision made a number of years ago. That it needs, and the decision was decided to start it at the lower portion. And so, Director Conklin, is it now fair to say that it's the middle portion that's the priority?
Yes. So the council took action in the last full CIP to fund the Maryland 355 between Montgomery College, Rockville, and the Germantown Transit Center. The portions that aren't funded are from Germantown Transit Center north to Clarksburg, and the section from Rockville, Montgomery College, Rockville to Bethesda. This amendment extends the southern terminus of that slightly further south to the Rockville Metro Station, but the northern component is unchanged. And in terms of the Opportunity Lanes funding, in the last TPB action, the county and state agreed to extend the commitments that had been made until a later time at adoption of the next regional plan. We're actively negotiating, adjusting those commitments to correspond to what they may do in terms of phasing for American Legion Bridge, I-485, I-270. So that may resolve itself before the next CIP is reviewed.
Okay. Well, that's an ambitious timeline. If it's
It may not provide the revenue in that period, but the agreement may resolve itself.
Sure. Okay, so thank you for explaining just that minor shift. Makes sense to me. Yeah, I hear you.
I understand the shift, it makes sense to. I mean, moving forward with the central, and I have great concerns about revenue source for the remainder, particularly the north portion. But for this action now, I mean, that's a much longer tail. But for this action now, this does make sense.
Well, so picking up on that, as you mentioned the next CIP, right? And as we're taking this up and know the work is underway or quickly begins once we dispense of this budget, approve of this budget, just re-upping the fact that we do need transportation options in the up county. And as we're doing a 21-mile long BRT, is it 21 mile? Yeah.
Yeah, roughly.
Roughly 21 mile long 355, it would have been my preference to start it at the northern end where there is a dearth of transit options. I think this only keeps chipping away at those prospects, but hopefully, in your own words, something will resolve itself between now and next year.
Well, and there may be other adjustments to funding programs that we can make to accelerate portions of this as we review the entirety of the program going into FY27.
Okay. So, without objection.
Thank you. Moving on to another bus rapid transit project. This is Veers Mill Road. The executive recommends a $10.2 million increase to the bus rapid transit Veers Mill Road project. It also corrects an error in the previous federal aid calculation, reducing federal aid to this project by $2 million. This net change in funding is accounted for by a $12 million increase from the state bus rapid transit fund. This amendment also delays completion of construction of this project from FY28 to FY29 to reflect operational construction related, delays on the ground.
The federal aid calculation, was that a rounding error or?
Well, it is a rounding error, but I can let Joanna Conklin from DGX explain what it actually represents.
Thank you.
Joanna Conklin, BRT program, DGS. So when we're asking for 80% federal aid, and when we initially did the calculation, we didn't take out the portion from when we entered the project into the FTA process. So they will only start covering like after we officially entered what they call project development, which was October of 2022. So there was like a small amount of expenditures that we had made before that point in time that is not eligible for that 80%. That's the difference.
And any reason to believe that any of these bus rapid transit projects or mass transit here in Montgomery County, new projects are in any jeopardy with federal DOT? Or change of mindset, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, not at this time. We're still, Veers Mill BRT is in the process of being rated for a grant by the FTA. We've been continuing all of our work with FTA, regular meetings. We just finished a risk workshop with them. So we have not seen, there's a delay in the recommendation coming out, but we're still actively working with them. And Maryland 355 Central has been entered into the FTA process as well for a New Starts grant, and we're working with them on that as well. So, we can't predict what's going to happen, but it's not, we're still talking to them on a weekly basis.
The fact they're engaged is a good sign.
Yeah, they're engaged. They're very engaged.
That staff is there, answering emails, taking meetings, moving ahead. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll end it there. Yeah. Okay. Staff is there, right. Okay, so we'll accept that without objection. And last item on this afternoon.
Yes, this is the hydrogen fuel cell buses and fueling site project. This change has two components that the recommended amendment. The first is another federal aid item. This is a swap of $1.4 million in current federal aid with an equivalent amount of current revenue. This is done to remain in accordance with the FTA grant agreement. I'll defer to DOT and DGS to fill in, more about that. But
Okay, that's me again, apparently. Yeah, so the issue here was that when we put in the grant agreement with FTA, we had certain line items allocated for certain funding sources and where the federal funding was going to go. When we did our CIP, it didn't quite match that, and we thought we would be able to do an amendment with FTA, and they told us no, it has to match exactly where. So it's just essentially an administrative change, no new money.
Understood. Okay. Without objection.
I'd also just like to clarify
please.
in the packet, it says the project was delayed for funding reasons. That's not accurate. The funding for the project is fine. There's a small delay due to design and contracting issues, but that current revenue in FY27 is already appropriated, so there's no additional funding needed for this project at this time.
great. Yeah, that was an error in the staff report. The funding swap and the 1-year delay are unrelated.
Leave it to the CIP section to have all the different rounding errors and writing errors and so forth. But it's all good. It works itself out. Appreciate this very good conversation. I know that our colleagues in the full council will be very engaged, particularly in the fare-free conversation. But I think we've done a really good job of you've explained it, all the options that are out there, and the only substantive change from this afternoon is that $250,000 going on the rec list pending further analysis or at least explanation. Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Thank you.
And so the committee covered all of the decision, the changes. So council staff recommends approving all other items recommended by the executive in the FY26 operating budget for transit services, including compensation, annualizations, and other personnel changes and non-discretionary operating cost increases.
We do. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you all. We're adjourned.
Date transportation information to aid you in your daily commute. You are listening to the Montgomery County Transportation Management Center's Travelers Advisory Radio System, WPBG.